Great. Uh, Good afternoon. It is 3:42 here at 1520 Market Street, and we are here today for a public hearing regarding our Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program application. My name is Noel Pfeffer. I lead the city's Community Development Administration, and I'm joined by Rashonda Alexander, our Director of Compliance, and Pam Olivieri, who's leading this program. On August 22nd, we published a draft application for our Section 108 loan program. And we'll walk through it today and answer any questions. We're seeking public input because we've developed a menu of options and want to hear from you, the public, about which ideas make the most sense and seem most impactful to you. So we are accepting and welcoming public comment through September 30th. And seeking to submit an application in October. One of the key elements here is that HUD has announced a Legacy Cities Challenge. And so we do need to inform HUD and submit an application by November 1st in order to participate in that challenge and some of the unique flexibilities that it offers. And so as we move forward, I'll be running through some slides here and starting really by setting the context for our Section 108 loan application, which is the city's Economic Justice Action Plan. We're seeking to leverage federal funds in this HUD program to drive economic justice in the city of St. Louis, and that really stands for two fundamental principles. One is that equity is a precondition to growth, that we have deep disparities in the city of St. Louis, whether you look at wealth or life expectancy or educational outcomes. And we cannot grow as a city while half of the city is left behind. And in the same ways that these disparities have been a function and a product of public policy, we must be equally intentional in reversing it. So that's principle number one. The second principle is it's about empowering, developing, and transforming the city, and really starting with residents, with economic empowerment for individuals, families, entrepreneurs, youth, homeowners, et cetera, to really create a ladder of opportunity and ensure that the change that we're driving is sustainable. Because if we just transform the built environment and the housing stock without investing in the people, it's not going to last. And the last point I'll make about the city's Economic Justice Action Plan is in the top right-hand corner, you can see a set of survey results. We collected back in 2021 as a city over 5,000 survey results. That's more than 1% of city residents regarding their priorities for federal funding. And the number one priority was neighborhood transformation. And so that's really one of the lenses, the primary lens that we're applying as we think about how we can invest federal funds. A second key point is you'll note that the four proposed uses we're going to talk through today about our Section 108 plan all are focused on housing. And that's because we recognize that the city of St. Louis faces extraordinary housing challenges. We have about 77,500 tenant households in the city of St. Louis, about 60,000 homeowners. About half of our tenant households are cost burdened. About a quarter of our homeowners are cost burdened. And honestly, that understates it because the data we're using primarily looks at mortgage, property taxes, and utility payments, doesn't look at the actual cost of maintaining homes. So we know that the real cost burden is likely even higher. And collectively, these families, these cost-burdened families, roughly 50,000 households in the city of St. Louis, pay more than $250 million more than they can afford in housing costs every year. And so it's a key priority to address this crisis and address it by building housing as diverse as our city, responding to the needs of those who are unhoused with permanent supportive housing and tiny homes and other resources, responding to the needs of those who face significant cost burdens by producing more affordable rental housing and supporting homeowners and prospective homeowners build wealth and pass on that generational wealth by building for sale housing. So we're committed to investing across that spectrum of housing. And that's exactly what we've done. We have currently committed between CDA and the Affordable Housing Commission and SLDC, a total of about $87 million in funding towards the development of affordable housing, which is currently driving and subsidizing the development of about 3,000 units of affordable housing across the city, totaling about $680 million in total development costs. And so what we're proposing today is a way to scale that. And we're proposing a $50 million Section 108 loan that will allow us to significantly expand this housing production pipeline. And we want to provide this context to show you that what we are proposing, we have a demonstrated track record of delivering on. A final point I'll make is that part of the Economic Justice Action Plan involves investing federal funds and local funds in accordance with the need. And when we look at the city of St. Louis, whether it's life expectancy, violent crime rates, health outcomes, income, property values, vacancy, et cetera, what we see is similar trends emerging. And the fact that in particular North St. Louis, but also significant pockets of South St. Louis have been historically disinvested in through forces ranging from restrictive covenants to segregation to white flight, highways, quote unquote urban renewal policies, et cetera. We know that the city has seen intentional disinvestment. And so as you can see, our awards and our investments reflect those trends and are focused disproportionately in addressing and revitalizing those areas. And again, this is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic imperative. So with that, I want to dig into our specific Section 108 proposal, starting with an overview of the program itself. And the first point to make is that this is a loan guarantee program. And these slides are all available online, by the way. But it's a loan guarantee program where the city of St. Louis would borrow $50 million from HUD at a roughly 5.6% interest rate. And then we would turn around and loan these funds out to housing developers in a range of different programs that we'll walk through, a menu of options of the types of loans that we could provide under this program. But it starts with a loan from HUD to the city. Now, the city would repay that debt principally with the repayments of housing developers that would then be used to repay HUD, but we would have CDBG funds committed as collateral, which is one of the things that keeps that interest rate down. And then that repayment may be funded by CDBG, project revenues, those are the loan payments of our housing developers, through a TIF or other local sources. And Section 108 is pretty flexible in terms of the range of investments that it can fund, but it's particularly well suited to housing, and we'll talk through eligible uses in a little more detail shortly. So the city of St. Louis theoretically has a borrowing capacity of just under $90 million. But in consultation with the comptroller's office and the city's financial advisor, we are currently proposing a smaller $50 million Section 108 loan, which would result in annual debt service of about $4,250,000. This does not preclude us from seeking additional funding down the line. And practically, we will have plenty of work on our hands to deploy the $50 million in loans. So it makes sense as a first step. We can evaluate the program, see if it has produced the objectives that we have intended and anticipated, and potentially go back for additional funding down the line. Program requirements, there's a lot of detail here, and I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds, although I'm happy to answer questions. But the core eligibility framework of Section 108 is that it is built on the CDBG chassis. And that means that if it is a CDBG stands for Community Development Block Grant, and the city receives about 18 million in Community Development Block Grant funds each year. And the way that this program works is that we commit as collateral 4.25 million of that CDBG funding in payment of the Section 108 loan. Ideally, however, we don't want to have to use those CDBG funds, right? Because they're currently being allocated to a diverse array of housing, social service, and other community development programs. So we really do want to treat this as a true loan fund where we are expecting repayment, although there may be certain exceptions to that. But in general, eligible activities are CDBG eligible activities. Like all HUD funds, they must meet one of the three national objectives, and those three are benefiting low and moderate income persons, aiding in the elimination or prevention of slums or blight, or meeting the urgent needs of the community. As a practical matter, meeting the urgent needs of the community really only arises in the context of a natural disaster, which hopefully we won't see. And so we're really looking at the first two. And furthermore, there's a requirement that at least 70% of our CDBG funds are used to benefit low and moderate income persons. And so that really is our primary national objective, although a subset of the funds may be used for the elimination or prevention of slums and blight. And then there's a variety of additional requirements that will apply for these funds, including environmental review, Davis-Bacon, Section 3 participation, Build America, Buy America, and various other public HUD requirements. The way that the financing works is that the city is the borrower, and we enter into an agreement both with HUD, but HUD also enters into agreement with the fiscal agent, which is the Bank of New York, is responsible for servicing Section 108 debt. And then the Bank of New York would enter into an agreement with the city of St. Louis as the borrower. And we wouldn't take any of these steps until first, and I'll talk about the timeline more at the end, until first our application is approved by HUD, and then furthermore until an ordinance is approved locally, authorizing all the steps in the execution of the financing agreements. The financial requirements, as I alluded to earlier, this debt can be repaid with CDBG funds, with third-party loan proceeds, with parking revenue, tax increment financing revenue, or other local sources. And it does also require that collateral, which is both the pledge of current and future CDBG, as well as potentially additional collateral. So now we get to the meat of our discussion today, which is 4 potential loan pools that we are proposing and soliciting feedback on. And the intent of this, these 4 proposals were born of public engagement and public input. We are currently going through our consolidated planning process, have convened a community advisory board, and again, the biggest focus that has emerged is the need for investments into housing. And so here we propose 4 different ways that the city could make these types of investment with different focuses and different priorities. And I'm going to go into each of them in more detail. But at a high level, the first is a neighborhood transformation loan pool focused on infill, new construction, and rehab. This is smaller single family and 4-family projects, looking at both rehab, but as well as new construction, and with a particular focus on traditional and modular construction. And HUD just recently released a new rule yesterday, updating and adding some flexibilities into its manufactured housing processes. The second option is, and we could do just one of these, we could do all of them, we could mix and match these investments in different ways. And that's, again, why we are soliciting public input. And we also may have missed something. So please, we welcome additional ideas. But our second idea is a major rehabilitation loan pool. And this one's really focused on reactivating large vacant buildings, larger than 25,000 square feet, with a particular focus on vacant schools, recreational centers, and vacant hospitals. And there's a list of potential buildings that could be targeted. But of course, all of these funds, we would issue a notice of funding availability and invite developers to propose their projects. The third project or potential loan pool is a downtown revitalization loan pool, really focused on revitalizing some of the vacant downtown behemoths, these vacant buildings that are really holding back our downtown. And finally, the fourth option is a distressed properties loan pool. And this is really designed to give the city a resource that we can leverage when major housing portfolios in the city are caught in untenable positions that could result in the displacement of hundreds of people, as we saw with both Heritage House and Northview Nursing Home, where hundreds of seniors were displaced, and trying to find create a resource that we can deploy to get ahead of these sorts of challenges and prevent that displacement on the front end. So I'll now go into each of these in a little more detail, starting with the neighborhood transformation loan pool. So the big picture point to make about the neighborhood transformation loan pool, if Tommy, you can go to the next slide, is that it is unique among, the purpose of it is to build markets. It is recognizing that there are vacant blocks in the city, like the one here on the left at the corner of Natural Bridge and Grand, that have not seen mortgages originated in decades. And so we deployed about 5 million of ARPA funds in partnership with SLDC and leveraging new market tax credits to build about over 20 homes here on this corner, which is really strategically vital for the city. The corner of Natural Bridge and North Grand is the proposed terminus for the North-South Metrolink. It is the terminus for the Brick Line Greenway. It's at the heart of our vision for North St. Louis, and there was not until recently a housing market there, or a market for mortgages. For the first time having these mortgages being issued, we now create a market where private parties can also go out and secure lending and finance to rehabilitate other homes. And so that's a huge priority for the city, is this catalytic neighborhood transformation investments. And so the proposal in this neighborhood transformation loan pool is to make these very concentrated, focused investments in key geographies. And because we are going to be building the markets under this proposal, this is also the only proposal of all the ones that we'll talk about today where the loans would be at least partially forgivable. And so because the market would not exist to really fund the full repayment of the loans given present day construction costs. But as you can see, the eligible use here would be the development of affordable housing, up to 80% area median income for sale properties, up to 50% area median income for rental properties. To prioritize the redevelopment of LRA property, the city has about 10,000 parcels in our land bank. And Tommy, if you can go back, about 10,000 parcels in our land bank. And we think that this is, while vacant properties are often seen as a liability, they're also enormous assets for the city to have these properties under our site control. And looking to fund, as I mentioned before, a mix of new construction and rehab housing as diverse as our city. Eligible applicants would include developers, not-for-profits, community development corporations, SLDC, but we do need to emphasize that under the CDBG rules, new construction would have to be conducted by community-based development organizations. These are called CUBDOs commonly, and essentially the requirement is that over half of your board needs to be a resident of the neighborhood or fall into certain other prescribed categories. We would issue a notice of funding availability for these funds, and we would evaluate proposals on the basis of the qualifications and experience of the applicant, on the basis of the cost and financial feasibility of the proposal, on the basis of the design and whether it's of high quality, durable, lasts 50 or more years, accessible, sustainable, and on its impact on the neighborhood and its proximity to community assets. Next slide. As I mentioned before, we would look to focus our investments in key strategic areas, and I've highlighted a few of these in this presentation today. On the left-hand side here, you see Walnut Park East and West, which abuts also the very strong and healthy North Point neighborhood. When we look at the city's residential market, North Point really emerges as a really strong bright spot, an anchor in North St. Louis. And so building off of that strength and investing in Walnut Park is certainly attractive to the city. Similarly, here you can see a series of investments that we are currently making and are interested in expanding on in the Ville and Greater Ville. Starting on the lower right-hand corner, with the Killark Electric Building, recently rechristened as the Monarch Building, which the city through SLDC has acquired and is working to redevelop into effectively City Hall North, where we will locate our LRA, the St. Louis Area Agency on Training and Employment, the Office of Violence Prevention, and various other economic development and economic empowerment city agencies, as well as a modular housing construction facility where, in partnership with Rankin, young people will be trained in state-of-the-art construction techniques. That development is underway, as are partnerships with For the Ville, a community organization working on developing MLK into a cultural boulevard, as well as a partnership that goes back years, if not decades, between the city and Northside Community Housing, where we are developing single-family homes, for sale single-family homes along North Sarah for sale. There's a variety of other projects along MLK, including SLDC's redevelopment of the Marshall School, Ozella Foster's Funeral Home, and various other investments that the city is supporting in order to revitalize this part of the city. Next slide. And then, of course, we know that there's tremendous opportunity around NGA. Here we see that many of the vacant properties in this geography are privately owned, but we think that there's tremendous opportunity to make neighborhood transformation investments in this geography as well. None of this is to exclude any other geography. There would be open and competitive funding availabilities. It's just representative of the types of investments that we have made, are making, and could make. Next slide. As we move on now to option number 2, this is our major rehabilitation loan pool. And again, the objective here is to rehabilitate community anchors. We know that across the city, we have seen schools close. We have seen hospitals, most recently South City Hospital closed. We have seen rec centers vacant. We have seen churches closed. And while we understand some of the shifting dynamics that we are working downstream from that have resulted in these closures, we also are committed to rehabilitating as many of these beautiful buildings as we can into community anchors, what they've been for their entire life. And we think this is critical to neighborhood revitalization. It's not just about the smaller developments, it's about a healthy mix, a holistic mix of larger anchor developments as well as block by block market development. And so the target geography here is citywide. The eligible use is mixed use and mixed income redevelopment. When we talk about mixed use and mixed income redevelopment of funding that with Section 108 funds, there are some tricky elements which emerge, namely, housing must be at least 51% affordable in order to qualify. And furthermore, public facilities and improvements may not include buildings for the general conduct of government. This will become relevant in the downtown revitalization component. And finally, there's a variety of different types of uses. I'm just going to go to the next slide here. If you can go forward 2 slides, Tommy, because this really explains it well. When you have a mixed use development that you're funding with Section 108 or CDBG, you really need to split it out into phases in order to understand which phases are eligible and which are not. So in this example, and this was actually provided by HUD, the housing rehab would not be eligible because only 1 unit is affordable out of 4. And so it's less than that 51%. However, a health clinic that primarily serves low to moderate income individuals would be eligible. A public facility that serves neighborhood residents who are primarily low to moderate income would be eligible. And then the parking would be partially eligible and partially ineligible. Essentially, you then cost allocate any costs that need to be split out evenly across the different phases according to the proportion of the work that is eligible versus that is not. So you'd have the proportion of the parking associated with the public facilities, in this case, that is eligible, and the portion associated with the housing that is not. So there are some tricky elements there that I just wanted to try and work through. Again, the eligible applicants, if you could go back, Tommy, there we go. The eligible applicants here would include developers, nonprofits, CDCs, SLDC. We would be seeking a loan application. We will also have to procure an underwriter for all of these loans, and a little bit more on that at the end. And we would apply very similar evaluation criteria to those discussed previously, and anticipate interest rates around 6%. Next slide. Here's just a quick overview of the types of costs which are eligible, and you can see it's a wide range. Next slide. And we move on now to option number 3, the downtown revitalization loan pool. So our objective here is to rehabilitate these enormous vacant downtown buildings in order to breathe life into the heart of our region. We know that when downtown struggles, the entire region struggles, and when downtown does well, the entire region does well. The fates of our downtown and our region are intertwined. And I also want to be clear that we're not naive about the fact that investments into downtown alone are unlikely to be sustainable unless they're paired with investments into the city as a whole and the surrounding area. Downtown is surrounded by 3 of the highest concentrations of poverty in our region. The array of affordable housing projects that were created in the wake of Pruitt-Igoe on the near north side of downtown, Clinton Peabody, Frenchtown, and various other affordable and public housing just south of downtown, and a variety of public and affordable housing developments in East St. Louis, just across the river. So again, downtown is surrounded by 3 of the highest concentrations of poverty in our region. We need to address those challenges as well in order to ensure that our investments in downtown are sustainable. But that's actually exactly what we're doing. Through the Choice Neighborhoods program, the city has partnered to develop a $240 million redevelopment of Preservation Square, 695 units, as well as to make investments into parks north of downtown, including Loretta Hall Park and Columbus Square. The city has also awarded funds to support the redevelopment of both Carr Square and Cambridge Heights, as well as Clinton Peabody, and we are working on a Choice Neighborhoods application to support a broader re-envisioning of the neighborhood just south of downtown, just as we have done just north of downtown. There have also been the investments into the convention center, into City Park, into NGA, and the proposed North-South Metrolink line, all of which together add up to more than the sum of their parts in terms of creating opportunities for profound neighborhood transformation. So we believe that the time is right to also invest directly into downtown with a particular focus on these vacant downtown behemoths. And we'll talk a little bit about a few examples in a moment. Again, the same rules around mixed use and mixed income redevelopment apply. The same rules around eligible applicants and application processes apply. We'd be looking at interest rates of around 6% and evaluating projects on the same basis. As we move to the next slide, the most obvious and notorious example of these sort of vacancies in downtown is the Railway Exchange Building, 1.2 million square feet, a storied history. And the city is partnering with Greater St. Louis Inc., SLDC, and various other partners to purchase the Railway Exchange Building, and should our offer not be accepted, to condemn and acquire it through the use of eminent domain. And so while we have not yet determined whether what the prospective uses of the building are and whether Section 108 will be a source, this does open the door to using Section 108 as a source of funds to help bring the Railway Exchange Building back online, in particular through the production of affordable housing units, because we do know that the building has had a range of potential uses proposed, including retail, amenities, certainly parking, residential units, and a green roof, and will likely require a mix of all those uses to put together a serious and feasible redevelopment plan. And so Section 108 funds would be available to support eligible uses, most obviously the development of some of the Railway Exchange building into affordable housing. And I want to be clear that we would not require that 51% of the units of the entire building necessarily be affordable housing if we can phase out the development or identify a kind of sub condo of the Railway Exchange building that can be funded with Section 108 funds. Another really great example of a vacant building downtown is the Municipal Courts building. It's owned by the city. It's had a variety of prospective uses proposed, from city offices to a hotel to a childcare center for city employees to a restaurant or bar or cafe. And this would be another option in terms of investments that we would explore with a downtown revitalization Section 108 loan pool. The cost of redevelopment here is substantial. It's a beautiful historic building, but also poses various environmental and other challenges. Next slide. And then the final example that we have here is the Millennium Hotel, which is another landmark building in the city of St. Louis, which the city, in partnership with Greater St. Louis, is currently working to acquire. There has been an offer submitted to purchase, and some of those details, transactional details, are being finalized. But once again, Section 108 loans could be available to support this development effort should there be a CDBG and Section 108 eligible use. And should, of course, a variety of other steps occur, including the submission of the application, approval of the application, passage of an ordinance, submission of a loan application, et cetera, et cetera. I want to be clear that we are in the initial stages of the Section 108 loan process. The fourth and final option that we are proposing here is a distressed properties loan pool. And our goal here is to provide low interest capital to property portfolios that have found themselves in I guess I just will use the term a death spiral. And it does happen even to responsible property owners during COVID when they didn't have tenants paying rents and therefore did not have the cash flow to fund necessary vacant unit turns. And so there are property portfolios that have found themselves with long-term vacancies on their books and vacant units that they're unable to bring back online. And that ultimately, it becomes a self-perpetuating spiral where there's not enough money to repair the units, there's not enough revenue, there's not enough money to repair more units, et cetera, et cetera. And this can lead to really tragic results, as we've seen if we move to the next slide with Northview Nursing Home, where it closed overnight. I do want to emphasize that this was not a case of responsible property owners. Northview Nursing Home acted profoundly irresponsibly. But as a result of 170 residents were displaced. If we go to the next slide, I think there's a more sympathetic example in the case of Heritage House, where freezing temperatures led to pipes bursting and about 180 predominantly senior citizens being displaced. And so what we want to do with these funds, again, is if we go to the next slide, identify some of these challenged properties ahead of time before the problems become so severe that they are forced to close and seniors are displaced, in order to help seniors age in place and support our city. And one really clear example of a property where these kind of resources could be needed is Homer G. Phillips Senior Apartments. This facility is owned by the city, and so we feel a profound sense of responsibility to ensure that necessary repairs are made. But right now, the property does not cash flow. It's under private management. And so it's in dire need of repairs. If we go back quickly to the distressed properties loan pool overview slide, I'll just mention some summary points, which is the target geography here is citywide, although we could also explore targeting it towards qualified census tracts. The eligible use is affordable rental housing and nursing homes, in particular repairs, vacant unit turns, and rehabilitation. The eligible applicants would be developers, nonprofits, CDCs, SLDC. The application process would involve a loan application. We would be especially, I mean, with all of these, we would scrutinize the finances, but I think especially when we're looking at distressed properties, we need to have a really clear idea of their financial liabilities and of their capacity to repay. The ideal use case here is a property that, with the right investments, is able to become sustainable and repay the loan. But we don't want to subsidize irresponsible actors. And so we would need to be very rigorous. And this is why having a professional, experienced underwriter is so critical. And it would also be an opportunity to possibly really, again, dig into their finances, understand what's going wrong, and what steps need to be taken. And there would likely be very clear conditions attached to this low interest loan. Again, the ideal use case is a property that, whether it's because as a result of so much deferred maintenance, they've lost insurance and they cannot afford a private sector market loan, having the city act as a lender of last resort, but a responsible lender of last resort. Next slide. This is the last slide, and it just talks about process and timeline, just to level set what some of the next steps will be. First and foremost, we need to finalize our submission, which requires us selecting the projects that we want to apply for. And before we do that, we are collecting public input, as I mentioned, through 4 p.m. on September 30th. So please do reach out to us and provide that public input. And in a moment, I will ask Rashonda or Pam to share the email address at which we are accepting public input. We'll then submit the application, likely in October 2024, again, in advance of that November 1st Legacy Cities Challenge deadline. And then we would hope to have HUD approval before the end of the year. We would then start the process of financing the Section 108 loan, including financing the loan documents, passing the enabling ordinance, executing the financial documents. And then with that work complete, we would begin implementation. We would procure an underwriter. And I will note that because the city's procurement and contracting processes take some time, we may be issuing a RFP for an underwriter on a relatively short basis in the coming weeks. But we wouldn't, so that we can have that underwriter on board before we issue the NOFA, so that they can have a hand in helping us design the application that we will ask interested parties to fill out. We would then issue that notice of funding availability, invite prospective applicants to apply. And then once we've made our selections, we will begin issuing and servicing the loans. So that's a brief overview, and really excited to hear from the public, answer any questions, and just hear your feedback and public comment. Yes.
Well, kudos. I think this is a wonderful and very needed program for the city of St. Louis. Now, so do we just keep watching your website to find out when this is coming down the pipe, or are you going to put it in the paper or some kind of notification so we know that it's up and going, and as a not-for-profit we can apply?
Yes, great question, and thank you for the kind words. The question, I don't know if folks online could hear, was about what information will be publicly available as we move forward, and how will prospective applicants know to apply. And the answer is that this will be a fully public process at every step of the way. Once we submit our application, we will post our final application with the final projects that we are proposing on our website. Before we issue, if we are approved by HUD, the ordinance process will be fully public and take place through the Board of Aldermen. Once we are ready to accept applications, we will issue a notice of funding availability, which will be posted on our website and in the paper, and as broadly as we can spread it. We typically, whenever we have our funding cycles, we go around to neighborhood associations and try to just spread the word as widely as we can. But it will also be publicly available on our website and in the newspaper. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Looking at the allocation for 15 million, you would say, now will that be broken down into like, $3-5 million increments per project, based on per project and needs? And then once it's actually done, since it is a loan, will that be able to use the capital stack? Because looking at like an old school, you know, a lot of money to do the actual rehab. Just trying to understand where you guys are going with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. The question, I'm going to repeat it. Just should I be repeating these questions, Tommy?
Yes.
Okay. The question was about whether we anticipate allocating each of the loan pools to one project, to multiple projects, making larger $10-15 million awards or smaller $3-5 million awards, et cetera. And the answer is that we won't know in part until we see the applications, right? And we see the kind of applicant pool. I'll say in general, we are interested in concentrating our impact. And we recognize that especially as these are loan funds that need to be repaid, that larger loans, especially for the larger projects, make sense. But I think that it'll be different for each one. So for example, for the neighborhood revitalization one, I would anticipate multiple smaller awards. For the major rehabilitation one, I would anticipate a few larger awards. I think the same is true for the downtown revitalization one and for the distressed properties project. So it'll vary, and these are all just my preliminary kind of intuitions about what the demand for these products look like. So we need to look at applications and consult with our underwriter because we also want to manage risk. But that's my current answer to the question, but I just want to emphasize that it may change once we actually flesh this out with our underwriter further and see the applications. Go ahead.
And on, especially in the new construction of some of the big developments, the repayment term could be for deferred payments, it's not construction or close construction, so that you generate revenue, or how would that actually work?
Great question. The question is about repayment terms. Again, this is something that we'd work with our underwriter to set, but in general, the Section 108 repayment term for the city is 20 years. And so we'd be looking at similar repayment terms for the projects that we fund. And similarly, the city is able to defer payment initially, and we would contemplate being able to offer the same flexibility to loan recipients.
That I presented a project to you, we talked about everything, but my areas that Jeff Vanderbilt just talked about, so everything east of Grand, the natural bridge, around central, all of that, we're focusing on. I'm presenting an application to SLDC for their infill housing project. And I saw you had one for infill housing. With that, how would that work if one over the other or both?
Yeah.
You can get money from one.
The question was about how the proposed neighborhood transformation loan pool and the infill housing investments that we seek to make with Section 108 loans intersect with the RFQ process that SLDC is currently going through to allocate $3.25 million of ARPA funds towards infill housing. And the answer is that their funding process will likely conclude before our funding opportunity opens. And so I congratulate you on submitting your application to that funding process. And if you're awarded, then presumably you wouldn't apply for this next one. But if you're not awarded, you can certainly look at applying for this next opportunity as well. This NOFA, I would like to be able to get, depending on how quickly we're able to work with HUD and take all the requisite steps, I'd like to get it out in Q1 or 2 of 2025, the NOFA, but things that might be optimistic. Things always seem to go a little slower than they should, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
And the school in that same area, the city central. So that's the Central High School. Old Central will be part of that development because it's mixed use, community development. Retail, things like that, marketplaces. That fall under the 108, and would that be available as part of the whole application?
So you would likely submit two separate requests, so you would split your projects. And I think it makes sense because rehabilitating a school building is a pretty hefty undertaking in and of itself. So you would split that project out and submit an application to the Major Rehabilitation Loan Fund. And then a separate one for the infill housing, work to the Neighborhood Transformation Loan Fund, in the example you provided.
But I know you said the school buildings, Turner Meadow. I was interested in Turner Meadow for some years to make it either production center to add to some for the students to be able to have facility. Would that work as part of that 108?
Possibly. The vacant buildings that were identified are there merely as examples. They are not a exclusive list of the projects that we would seek to fund. So if it's a large vacant building above 25,000 and you're seeking to develop it into at least including affordable housing, then it would be eligible. I think I saw a question in the comments. Tommy, do you want to help us address that?
Sure, there's a few in the chat.
I see the first one and I'll answer it.
Okay.
Projects be selected before the application is submitted? Will some of them be selected later? And the answer is that all of the projects will be, all the specific developments will be selected later. What we are applying for is a loan pool. And so what we do is we propose the program to HUD. HUD approves the program. And then we select the projects through a application and underwriting process. And so the project, while the use of the word project is a little tricky because each of the loan pools is considered by HUD to be a project. So we have a neighborhood transformation project, a major rehabilitation project, a downtown revitalization project. The specific developments will be selected later. And then there's a question about technical assistance and assistance which we can provide. And the answer is that while we cannot provide assistance after the application deadline, we will review what is submitted at the deadline and rate it accordingly. We are absolutely available to answer questions in a public and transparent manner up to a certain point before the application deadline. I don't know if Rashonda, you would have anything to add to that question about technical assistance.
Not for this period of application.
What?
We don't know if we're going to receive the Section 108 loan from HUD yet. So we aren't able to answer that question.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the terms of the assistance and communications that CDA can and will provide will be set forth in the notice of funding availability, and maybe in some ways distinct from the processes that we follow today, in that this is a loan underwriting process as opposed to a grant process. So we'll be learning. Do we have any other questions?
That's all we have for chat right now.
As a developer, what financial support, background, qualifications, what you need to apply for this loan?
We'll certainly be looking for the proposed development to have a full capital stack because our risk tolerance is going to be extremely low, seeing as this is a loan that we need to repay to HUD. And so whereas with the current grant applications, we have a somewhat higher risk tolerance, you'll see the standards in terms of having a full capital stack and being able to meet these underwriting standards will be higher.
proposed and not be in stone. Additional like 70-30. You know, certain capital stack.
I can't speak to it in the abstract. It would need to be based on a specific project proposal. All right. Can we share quickly with the public what the email address that,
Yes. It's a CDA at stlouis-mo.gov. I also put it in the chat.
thank you, Rashonda. And so we do encourage anyone watching or who may watch this recording later to share their feedback and input and comments at cda@stlouis-mo.gov. I am curious, we do have a small group here, if there are any of these uses that emerge as priorities that you would encourage us to think about to prioritize more than the other.
Well, I'm a broker and I work with a not-for-profit. And I think affordable housing across the country, we all know is, you know, in dire state. So I cannot, I mean, I get the mixed use and everything else, but we must provide a more affordable housing. So I know it's been on the top of the list. I think it should remain on the top of the list.
We really appreciate that feedback. It emerged as a priority for us as well in the engagement we've heard, and that, thank you for confirming that.
That to help developers and stuff acquire the land to be able to develop. Because that's important too, is, you know, the process of if you buy it out, you have to look at LRA, these steps. Short of access for us that are kind of ready to develop block by block.
Yeah, so being able to fund acquisition costs for affordable housing development. And acquisition is an eligible use of these funds, yes.
That's what's so attractive about this program for me, that we may be able to be more impactful because we may be able to do it block by block. I've been doing this for 5 years with CDA, and it's been very rewarding. But one of the things that we've been doing is more scattered site approach. If we are able to get a larger sum of money, we can be so much more impactful. And you'll see the difference. The neighborhood will see the difference. They'll feel that faster. And I think that's one of the driving forces behind hopefully getting this so we can implement it. And to your question about acquiring land, that's something we could definitely look at. I'm hoping that we can work with the underwriter and create a creative way to partner with the developers so that you're building something in a space that you want, in a space that's impactful to the neighborhood, and then we can both share in the proceeds from what was built. So partnership is important too in this because it is a loan and we have to take some of our proceeds and pay it back to HUD. But if we've got something attractive in place to incentivize developers to join with us to do it, I see huge things.
Easy acquire the land.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's right, but you want so many parcels like the infield housing is, but SFDC is 20 homes. So we would have to make sure that we acquire those 20 lots to, you know, to be able to make a viable proposal and to ensure that nobody comes in while we're trying to do that, swipe up the land from under us.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further questions? I do want to thank you, Pam, for all the work that you've put into this application and your passion for this work. And I'm really excited for us to move forward. And we want this also to be an ongoing dialogue. So please feel free again to reach out to us and provide comment and feedback as we move forward.
And lastly, we can find this presentation on your website. You can, okay.
It'll be posted with, where we leave the time.
But it's also posted on the Section 108 site right now as well.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. With that, we'll close this public hearing.